Hi folks, how you doing? Today we're gonna see yet another game of the American genius Paul Morphy. In this game he's going to be playing with the black pieces against McConnell in New Orleans in 1850. And we're gonna see a game in which he plays the French defense. So McConnell plays e4 and surprisingly Paul Morphy plays e6, the French defense. Surprisingly, because on those days, on the 19th century, the opening moves e4, e5 were almost compulsory. 99% of the games were started with these moves: e4, 1 e5. So this was not very common to use these half closed or flank openings or defenses. e4, e5 was almost on the only way they could play. Now Morphy shows here that he understands the chess much better than his opponents, than his contemporaries, because he plays a defense which was not used almost at all, and he still plays it very well without knowing any theory, I can imagine. So what does this e6 move do? Well, it doesn't take all the space the pawn could with e5, but it wants to control the center with the move d5 and give it extra protection. So this pawn will be protecting the d5 pawn in the next move. The logical move for white here is to play d4. Of course, other moves are possible, knight f3, knight c3, but when you can take all the center with the pawns, you almost always want to take it, so d4 is the logical move. And now the idea of black is to play d5. Now this pawn is protected by the pawn on e6 and stands very solidly in the center. And in fact, now the pawn on e4 is under attack. Now the pawn on d5 is attacking the white pawn on e4. The bad thing for black in this defense is usually this bishop on c8, because the pawn on e6 is blocking its natural development way, so it cannot be developed very well for the time being. So, well, this is going to be more or less the problem black is going to have in this defense. Now the pawn on e4 is under attack, and white can do several things about it. He can advance it. This is the advanced variation, which we will see in fact in this game, the so-called advanced variation, having a couple of pawn chains here from d4 to e5, from e6 to d5. He can also exchange it, taking on d5, and after taking here, black has solved his problem, the problem of his bishop. Now it can go away free without much problem. White can also defend it. Now both the two ways that are most recommendable to defend the pawn with are with the knight on b1, either playing knight c3, defending the pawn on e4, or playing knight d2, defending the pawn. It is also possible to play, for instance, something like bishop d3, but it is not that great, because black is going to gain some tempos. For instance, he takes on e4, bishop takes, and now knight f6, attacking the bishop is gaining a tempo, so this is helping a little bit black to develop. Anyway, here in this game we're going to see a little bit the advanced variation. So after d4, d5, e5 was played here. Now we got a couple of pawn chains, so-called pawn chains. e6, d5, d4, e5. This means that white is going to have edge in this side of the board, on the king side and in the center, as he has more space here. His pawns are taking more space. The pawn on e5 is holding very well this couple of dark squares. At the same time, black has to counter-attack on the queen side, and is going to try to undermine this d4 pawn with move like we will see, like c5, knight c6, queen b6. All about it is going to be all about this d4 pawn. Black has to undermine and attack it all the way he can, and also the f6 with moves like f6, the e5 pawn is going to be attacked as well. Now the natural and the most normal move in this position for black is to play c5 directly, attacking that pawn on d4. Black cannot just stand quietly and try to develop pieces in a shy way, because white has lots of space advantage in the center and in the king side, and if he manages to develop pieces very quietly without much trouble, he will have the advantage. Now the normal move is try to defend the pawn on d4 with another pawn. Try to keep the pawn there on d4, c3. Because if white takes on c5, both these pawns are now weak. Black can recapture the pawn on c5 immediately, and now the pawn on e5, although it's advanced, it's taking space. Is going to be under some heavy attack with moves like knight c6, queen c7, the knight to h6 or to e7 better, or and g6, and it's going to be under lots of attack. And this pawn in a future endgame is going to be also very strong. So taking on c5 is almost never a good idea. c3 is the logical move, defending. Now knight c6, once again attacking the pawn on d4. Here f4 is played, which, well, is playable but not the best move because it reinforces the center, the pawn on e5, but it is more important to protect the pawn on d4, so something like knight f3 was more correct. Queen b6 is absolutely correct. Now Morphy attacks once again the pawn on d4 and also targets the pawn on b2 so that the white bishop cannot, for instance, go to e3 to defend on d4 because black could take on b2, attacking the rook, winning a pawn, etc. This is not good for white. So the normal move here is knight f3, defending the pawn once again. As you can see, it seems that black had lots of troubles in the opening. That didn't seem at the first sight that great because he had less space. His position looked a little bit cramped, but now he's attacking the central pawn on d4 with lots of pieces, and white has to be careful to protect it and to try to not to lose it. Now bishop d7, another very logical move. This bishop is almost always going to go to d7 in the French defense. It is very logical. It's developing a piece and also blocking some possible checks to the king. a3 is a correct move because it's trying to control the b4 square so that black does not have jumps with the knight or the bishop to b4 in the future. So and he's also trying to play b4, establishing lots of control also in the queen side. Knight h6 is very correct, very typical move in the French defense. This knight is trying to go to f5 to put more pressure on the pawn on d4. And well, this is more or less the most normal development of the knight here. It is also possible to play the knight to e7, ge7, but in this case it doesn't seem that correct because it's blocking the way of the bishop, the activity of the bishop. Now this pawn on c5 is only protected with the queen, and white could win some tempos taking on c5, and after queen takes he could play something like b4, queen b6, and win some tempos. He could now have more space on the queen side and have more time to develop. And as I was saying previously, this a3 move has the idea of, for instance, if black takes on d4 eventually, now neither of these pieces can jump to b4, and white is preparing to play b4 himself. Now knight h6 was played as we saw, and now b4. Black has to take, otherwise white will take here and have a protected pawn here. C takes d4, c takes d4. Now white has established another pawn advantage here on the queen side. His pawns are far more advanced than the black's pawns, but black is taking his time, taking these tempos to develop pieces. Rook c8, another excellent move. Just trying bringing the rook into the game. Now it is in an open file and very well developed. Bishop b2 is more or less a correct move, although in this situation it may be a little bit suspicious because white is well behind in development. But this move is more or less typical in lots of advanced variations. It's protecting the pawn on d4. The disadvantage of this move is that the bishop on b2 is not protected. You may say, well, it's not a problem because there is a pawn here, black cannot take. Yes, that's true, but in lots of occasions there are lots of tactics. For instance, immediately playing moves like a5 because white just cannot take here, or even knight a5 because, for instance, I don't know, this may not be that great because But if white takes, the black queen can always take here, threaten the rook, etc. There are also always lots of tactics like this in the French defense when in the advanced variation, when white puts the bishop on b2 and it is not protecting. So all of this thanks to the big development that black has. Now knight a5 was played here, very logical. Now black is targeting, bombing this pawn on d4 with already 3 pieces. And although white is defending it with another 3 pieces, he has certainly must be really careful. At this point, white played queen d3, a little bit careless move, probably wanting to control this e3 square, willing to put the bishop on e2 and castle, because it seemed that black could have a little bit of threat to put the knight on e3, attack the queen, attack the bishop, and if the bishop moves, there is the g2 pawn hanging. I don't know, maybe it was more correct to play something like bishop e2, because after queen e3, well, the queen is under attack and the g2 pawn is also under attack, but maybe white also already had to play something like king f2 to protect e3, but it's already a difficult position for white. Why? Because he is well behind in development. His king is in the center, and black has mobilized almost all of his pieces, attacking the weakness of white, which is this pawn on d4. Now this pawn is a weakness because it cannot be defended with another pawn. In this case, queen d3 was played as we saw, and this is leading to a forced victory for black, sacrificing a bishop on b4, check. Now white must take, otherwise it's pawn down and black is already winning. White takes, and knight takes on b4. The point is that now the queen is under attack, and also the rook on the c file and the knight on are targeting the c2 pawn, etc. There are lots of threats here for white. Queen d2 was played. Well, it doesn't make any sense, any difference to put the queen on d1, because knight c2 is possible anyway, forking the king and the rook. But anyway, queen d2, and here once again knight c2 check was possible because it is protected by the rook on c8, and black is going to take at least exchange. But Morphy played another good move, attacking the queen right away with the rook on c2. Now this queen has only one square to go to, the d1 square, because all the rest of the squares are taken. They are not possible to go without losing the queen. Queen d1 was played, and at this point knight e3 is already winning the queen, because there is no way to escape. Lots of pieces just targeting the queen. The rook is protected by both knight. All of these squares are not available, so white resigned. As you can see, a very short game, only 14 moves, and in this very spectacular way, Paul Morphy showed us that he can play an opening that was not very trendy on those days, an opening that well, I'm sure was not considered to be correct, but he shows he understands opening and chess principles much better than his opponents. He understands that development and concrete attacking moves, concrete attacking weaknesses are much more important than this huge pawn center in this case. And finally wins beats a very respectable player in just 14 moves. Hope you liked the video, the game, and hope to see you in another videos. Thanks for watching.